The first time my sister said, "Don't steal my spotlight," I laughed. I thought she was joking. The words came out light playful, wrapped in that sugar-coated tone she always used when she wanted to sting without leaving a mark. But the look in her eyes told me she meant it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't being invited to her wedding as family. I was being staged as a prop and accessory in the story of her perfection. It started on a Wednesday morning in March. I was at my kitchen table balancing freelance invoices and half-eaten toast when Olivia called. Her voice came through too bright, too practiced. "Guess what? I have amazing news." I was still half asleep, rubbing my eyes. "You're pregnant," I teased. She laughed, that sharp little laugh of hers. "Please, even better. I got the venue. The Harrington estate. Remember that place you couldn't afford?" I froze. The Harrington. The same venue I had once dreamed of booking back when Ethan and I were still engaged before everything fell apart. She knew that. I told her over wine one night back when I still believed sisters were safe places. "Wow," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Congratulations, I know, right?" she said. "And here's the best part. I want you to be my bridesmaid." There was a pause long enough for her meaning to settle in. Bridesmaid. Not maid of honor. Just decoration. I thought maybe she continued, "You could handle the planning details. You're good with logistics and, well, you have the time." Translation: I was single, self-employed, and available for emotional labor. I forced a smile she couldn't see. "Sure," I said. "Whatever you need." "That's the spirit," Olivia chirped. "Oh, and one more thing. Don't go too bold with the dress, okay? The focus should stay on the bride." "The bride," I repeated, my coffee turning cold. "Right." By the time I hung up, the kitchen felt smaller. The air thickened with that old familiar heaviness, the kind that came from decades of swallowing what I wanted to say. Later that day, Mom called. "Wasn't that wonderful of your sister?" she said, her voice syrupy with pride. "She wants you by her side on her special day." "She wants me as her assistant," I said. Mom laughed like it was a joke. "Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. Olivia just likes things perfect." Perfect. That word had followed my sister like perfume since we were kids. Perfect grades, perfect hair, perfect fiancé. And me, the quiet one, the steady one, the one who made perfection possible by never asking for space. When I was little, I used to think being good meant being invisible. That if I stayed calm enough, small enough, maybe I'd finally earn their warmth. But invisible girls don't get warmth. They just get used. That weekend, Olivia sent me a link to the bridesmaid dress. It was champagne-colored satin, beautiful, expensive, and one size smaller than mine. "Ordered yours already," she texted. "Don't gain weight, haha." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Somewhere between the haha and the dress receipt, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet, steady pulse of defiance. A week later, we went dress shopping together. She'd brought Mom, of course. The boutique was all mirrors and soft lighting, the kind of place that made women whisper. Olivia twirled in her gown, the stylist clapping her hands. "She looks like royalty," Mom said. I nodded, watching her reflection beam back from every angle. She always does. When it was my turn to step out of the fitting room, Olivia tilted her head. She said, biting her lip. "Maybe a darker shade. You look a bit bright next to me." The stylist froze, unsure whether to laugh. I smiled tightly. "Of course." Mom clapped her hands. "See, this is why you're such a good sister. You always know how to make her shine." The words hit harder than they should have. Good sister. That title had always been my cage, lined with politeness and sacrifice. After the fitting, Olivia took a call while I packed the garment bags. I overheard her say, "She's useful, honestly. I can't trust the planners to do everything right." Useful. Not loved. Not appreciated. Just functional. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The shadows stretched long and strange across the room. I could still hear her voice in my head, "Don't steal my spotlight." I thought about every time I'd stepped aside for her. The school recital where I let her take my solo because she cried. The internship she got because I gave her my contact. Even the night Ethan and I broke off the engagement when she showed up at my door with champagne saying, "Maybe it wasn't meant to be. You can help with mine instead." The spotlight had never been hers. It had always been borrowed from me. By morning, I'd convinced myself to let it go. "She's insecure," I told the mirror as I brushed my hair. "Don't stoop to her level." But something in my reflection looked unconvinced. A few days later, Olivia called again. "Hey, quick thing," she said breezily. "Can you handle the vendor calendar? The coordinator's a mess. I trust you more." I hesitated. "You're giving me access to your wedding schedule." "Of course," she said. "Don't worry, I'll send you the login. Just don't mess anything up." When her email arrived that afternoon, I opened it out of obligation more than interest. Inside was a link, wedding master file, Olivia and Chase. I clicked. The spreadsheet opened like a cathedral of control, floral arrangements, photographer contacts, rehearsal dinners, seating charts. Every cell was color-coded, meticulously curated. I scrolled down to the timeline, the 14th of June, 2024, Harrington Grand Ballroom. For a moment, I just stared. Her dream day on paper, flawless. Then I noticed something small, something I shouldn't have cared about. The last edit tag modified by Hannah Bennett. My name. That was how little she thought of it, handing me the keys to her kingdom, assuming I'd guard it for her. I leaned back in my chair, the screen's glow painting my face in cold light. A strange calm settled over me. People like Olivia never see the quiet ones coming. They mistake silence for surrender. I closed the laptop slowly, my heartbeat steady, deliberate. Outside rain began to fall, tapping softly against the window. I watched the droplets trace crooked paths down the glass, merging, dividing, finding their own way down. And in that stillness, I whispered to no one, "Let's see how she shines when the lights don't turn on." It wasn't anger I felt. It was balance. Cold, quiet, inevitable balance. The next morning, Mom called before I'd even finished my coffee. "Your sister told me you're helping with the wedding planning," she said, her voice carrying that mix of pride and manipulation she'd perfected over the years. "That's so wonderful, Hannah. You've always been such a thoughtful girl." "I'm not helping," I said. "I'm managing." "Well," she laughed, "that's what sisters do. Support each other. Olivia says she couldn't do it without you." I looked at the half-empty mug in my hand, the steam twisting like smoke. "I bet she couldn't." Mom hesitated, catching the flatness in my tone. "Don't be unkind. You know she's under a lot of stress." "She's the one who wanted a six-figure wedding," I said quietly. "Money comes and goes, sweetheart. Family lasts forever, does it?" She went silent, then sighed. "Don't start, Hannah." I hung up before she could finish. By noon, my apartment felt like a command center. Olivia had given me access to every vendor, every deposit, every contract. My inbox was a parade of pastel subject lines: floral proposal, cake tasting schedule, final gown fitting, Harrington Ballroom deposit reminder. Each one was a reminder that she trusted me completely, and that trust was the most dangerous weapon she could have handed me. Later that afternoon, I drove to her house for a planning session. She lived in one of those new developments on the east side, identical white houses, perfect lawns, neighbors who smiled too long. Olivia opened the door in yoga pants and a silk headband, holding an oat milk latte. "Finally," she said, pulling me inside. "I've been dying to go over the seating chart. Mom's threatening to put Aunt Lorraine next to Uncle Paul again, and you know how that went at Christmas. I remember I said..." She threw ham at him. Olivia laughed like it was a charming family anecdote instead of an annual trauma. "Anyway, come on." I set up everything in the dining room. The table was covered with color-coded folders, ribbon swatches, and candles. She'd even printed my photo and Chase's on mock invitations. Hers glowing in white lace, me blurred behind her like an extra in someone else's life. "Pretty right," she said, watching my reaction. "It's elegant," I said. "Chase wanted a smaller wedding," she continued, adjusting her ponytail, "but I told him big moments deserve big gestures. You understand, right?" "Sure," I said. You've always been good at gestures. She didn't hear the edge in my voice. Or maybe she did and ignored it. We spent an hour moving names around tiny circular tables. Olivia sighed every time I suggested a change. No, Hannah. You can't put the cousins near Chase's coworkers. They'll talk about football all night. It's boring. We need energy. Then put yourself there, I muttered. What nothing? When we finally finished, she leaned back satisfied. Perfect. You're such a lifesaver. I knew you'd make this easier. Did you? Of course. You've always been the calm one, the steady one. Her words landed like compliments but felt like chains. The calm one, the steady one, the one who never ruins the picture. After dinner, she walked me to the door. Oh, one more thing, she said. At the bridal shower, maybe wear something neutral. You tend to draw attention without realizing it. I almost laughed. Don't worry, I said. I wouldn't want to outshine you. She grinned, completely missing the irony. See? That's why I love you. On the drive home, I couldn't stop replaying her voice in my head, so confident, so sure that I would always stand behind her, smoothing her edges. The sky outside had turned orange-gray, the kind of twilight that made everything look like a painting. I rolled down the window and let the wind cut through the noise in my head. By the time I got home, there was another email from her waiting in my inbox. Could you update the Harrington vendor notes? I'm meeting the florist tomorrow, but you're better at this stuff. I opened the attached document. Her entire wedding plan glowed on the screen, spreadsheets, calendar links, confirmation codes. My name appeared everywhere as the point of contact. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. I stared at the word authorized editor. Hannah Bennett for a long time, then whispered, funny how you need me to make your dreams come true. A notification pinged. A new message from Ethan. I hadn't spoken to him in months. Heard your sister's getting married, he wrote. You okay? I typed fine, then deleted it. Typed again, doing great. Busy helping. He replied with a single line, you deserve peace too, you know. Peace. The words sat there like a bruise. I closed my laptop and turned off the light. The next day, the family group chat lit up with photos from the florist meeting Olivia, posing beside towers of white roses, Mom tagging me in every picture. Look at our girls, so beautiful together. I didn't respond. I just stared at the photo where my sister was grinning, bouquet in hand, while Mom beamed beside her. My name wasn't even mentioned in the caption. That evening, Tessa came by unannounced, holding takeout and a bottle of wine. She dropped onto my couch like she owned it. You look like someone who's been emotionally mugged, she said. I laughed quietly. Close enough. She handed me a glass. So tell me what Princess Olivia did this time. I told her everything, the bridesmaid order, the dress, the planning, the invisible labor. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. You realize she's not asking for help. She's outsourcing guilt. She's my sister, I said. So blood isn't a free pass for cruelty. She doesn't think she's cruel. Tessa tilted her head. That's the problem. People like her never think they're cruel because they have an audience applauding their charm. I rubbed my temples. She made me log into her wedding calendar. I'm practically her assistant. She gave you access, full control. Tessa smirked. That's generous. Or stupid. She trusts me, I said almost offensively. Her eyes narrowed. You don't sound proud of that. I don't know what I sound like, I admitted, just tired. Tessa studied me for a long moment. You've spent your whole life protecting people who never asked how you were doing. Don't you ever get angry? I stared at the wine in my glass. I used to. Then I learned it doesn't change anything. Maybe not, she said, but it changes you. When she left, I sat alone on the couch, the room bathed in the soft hum of the refrigerator. The city outside was alive, glowing through the blinds. I picked up my laptop and opened the wedding file again. The spreadsheet flickered on the screen like a heartbeat. Under the date column, my cursor hovered over June 14. I didn't touch it. Not yet. But for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't afraid of what would happen if I did. Somewhere deep down, I felt it, the slow, inevitable turning of the tide. Not rage, not vengeance, just gravity. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and whispered to the empty room. Maybe peace isn't quiet after all. 3 days later, Olivia sent me a group text that read Bridesmaid fitting Saturday at noon. Don't be late. She added a photo of her gown under perfect lighting, the kind of picture meant to draw compliments, not conversation. Mom reacted with 3 heart emojis. I didn't respond. Saturday came with rain, thin and gray. The boutique sat in downtown Portland, all mirrors and champagne flutes, a cathedral for women who believed love came with receipts. I arrived on time, though part of me hoped they'd already started without me. Olivia was glowing, hair curled, makeup airbrushed, a vision of curated happiness. Mom was seated on a velvet chair, sipping sparkling water like she owned the place. Hannah, Olivia exclaimed, kissing the air near my cheek. You made it. I was worried traffic would get you. Not today, I said. Good, because you're helping me with the final adjustments, she said. Mom thinks the train should be longer, but I don't want to look too dramatic. Thoughts. I looked at her reflection in the mirror. You already do, she laughed, missing the jab. That's why I keep you around. Brutal honesty wrapped in monotone delivery. Mom's voice cut in. Be nice, Olivia. Your sister's helping you. Olivia rolled her eyes, turning to the seamstress. Ignore her. She's always so serious. I smiled faintly. Someone has to be. While the seamstress pinned fabric, Olivia chatted about her honeymoon, Italy, then Santorini. Chase booked the villas already, she said. We might extend if we love it. Maybe a month. Mom sighed dreamily. You'll be glowing, darling. I adjusted the hem of my bridesmaid dress, the satin sticking to my knees. How convenient, I said. You'll be gone long enough for everyone to forget this disaster of a seating chart. Olivia gasped, mock offended. Rude real, I corrected. Mom frowned. Hannah, please. Don't bring tension into this moment. I bit back the instinct to apologize. That's what I'd always done, patch, smooth, absorb. But not today. After the fitting, Olivia insisted we grab lunch. Bridesmaid bonding, she called it. The cafe was one of those places that served salads the size of a fist and charged for dressing. She ordered avocado toast with gold flakes because of course she did, and I just got black coffee. Mom's right, Olivia said between bites. You've been so quiet lately. Everything okay? Perfect, I said, mimicking her favorite word. She smiled, mistaking sarcasm for sincerity. Good. I was worried maybe you felt left out. Left out? I raised an eyebrow. Of your wedding? Well, yeah, she said. You've been single for a while, and I know that can be hard. I'm fine, I interrupted. I'm just saying, she continued, undeterred. When you see how happy Chase and I are, maybe it'll give you hope. Love finds people when they're ready. Her tone was syrupy, meant to sound kind but dripping with condescension. I stirred my coffee slowly. You're right. I wasn't ready. I was too busy helping you plan yours, she giggled. See, that's the spirit. I watched her for a moment, the way she gestured, how her earrings sparkled when she laughed. Everything about her demanded an audience. Maybe that's why she needed me. Someone to applaud the performance. When the bill came, she slid it toward me. You don't mind, right? I forgot my wallet in the car. I handed over my card without looking at her. Sure, I said softly. You always forget something. On the drive home, I called Tessa. She answered on speaker while painting her nails. How'd the fitting go? About as fun as a dental procedure without anesthesia, she snorted. Tell me everything. I did every detail, every smirk, every little reminder that my worth in that room depended on how invisible I could be. When I finished, she whistled low. And you didn't stab her with a safety pin, proud of you. I'm trying to stay civilized. Civilized, she repeated. That's just a fancy word for repressed. She gave me full admin access to her vendor schedule, I said suddenly. Tessa paused mid-laugh. What, her entire wedding plan? Spreadsheets, venue contracts, payment confirmations, all under my name. There was a beat of silence. Then softly, that's Interesting. It's careless. It's trust, she said. And trust can be rearranged. I didn't answer. The rain had started again, faint against the windshield. Tessa sighed. You're thinking about it, aren't you? I'm thinking about how she keeps calling me dramatic every time I react to her cruelty. That's not drama, she said. That's conditioning. She trained you to feel guilty for noticing her selfishness. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Maybe. Hannah, she said gently. You don't have to keep proving you're the good one. I'm not proving anything I said. I'm just tired of letting her rewrite every story. When I got home, the apartment was dark. The air smelled faintly of rain and lavender detergent. I dropped my purse on the table and sat down still in the bridesmaid dress. The zipper pinched my ribs. I turned on my laptop almost out of habit. The wedding dashboard loaded instantly, soft pink interface, Olivia's initials on top. My cursor hovered over the line, event date, the 14th of June 2024. I didn't touch it. I just stared. The date looked smug, untouchable, like a promise written in stone. Underneath it, a smaller line read, edited by Hannah Bennett. I thought of her laughing that morning, her hand brushing imaginary dust off her gown. Don't wear anything too bright. Okay? The spotlight's mine. I whispered to the empty room. Not anymore. The next day, Mom called again. Olivia said you were quiet at lunch. She says that a lot. Well, she's worried about you, is she? She feels like you're distant lately. I told her, you just need time. Time for what? To be happy for her. I laughed softly. You've been saying that my whole life. Hannah, Mom, I cut in. Do you ever stop to think, maybe I'm not jealous? Maybe I'm just tired of being the background. Her voice hardened. You've always been dramatic. There it was again, the family anthem. I hung up before she could finish. That night I dreamed of the Harrington Grand. The ballroom, empty sunlight spilling through the glass ceiling, dust floating in quiet air. I stood in the middle barefoot, my voice echoing when I said her name, but no one answered. When I woke, the world outside was pale and still. I made coffee, opened the window, and watched the first light hit the rain-soaked street. I told myself it wasn't revenge I wanted, it was clarity. But maybe sometimes those two things were the same. The florist called first thing Monday morning, her voice cheerful and oblivious. Hi, Hannah. I just wanted to confirm the final delivery time for the wedding. Still, June 21st, right. I froze the spoon halfway to my coffee. I'm sorry, what did you say? The 21st, she repeated. That's the date we have on file for the Moore wedding. Olivia Moore. My pulse stuttered. I think there's been a mistake, I said carefully. Oh dear, she replied. You're listed as the main contact. Can you double-check the timeline and email me if it's wrong? I will, I said. My voice steady though, my hand trembled slightly. When I hung up, I opened the shared wedding calendar. The screen blinked to life, soft pink headings, vendor tabs, timelines, all perfectly aligned. And there it was. The date column had shifted. June 21st, not June 14th. It must have been me. Maybe a slip, a wrong keystroke, an accidental drag of the mouse. But the strangest thing was that I didn't panic. I just stared at it for a long moment, feeling that quiet hum in my chest again, the one that always came before something irreversible. I hovered over the undo button. My finger didn't move. By noon, the emails began trickling in. The band, the caterer, the event coordinator at the Harrington, just confirming the new date. Appreciate the update, Hannah. Lovely working with someone so organized. I leaned back in my chair, the light from the screen reflecting off the framed photo of me and Olivia on the shelf. She was smiling, her arm looped through mine, both of us pretending closeness for the camera. I remembered that day, it was her engagement party. She'd whispered before the photo, try not to look too tense. It ruins the shot. Now I couldn't stop smiling. That afternoon, Mom called. Olivia said you're handling all the logistics. How's it going? Smooth, I said. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You're always so dependable. Between us, I don't know what Olivia would do without you. Neither do I. She laughed, not hearing what I meant. You're a blessing. That's what you are. Blessing. Funny word. It always sounded like a compliment and a curse. By evening, I'd received confirmation from every vendor. Every single one had accepted the new date without question. I should have corrected them, clarified the mix-up, but instead I watched it all fall into place, one quiet mistake, turning into a perfectly orchestrated accident. When the phone rang again, I almost ignored it. But the name flashing across the screen, Olivia, made me answer. Hey, she chirped. You got my message about the photographer I did. Perfect. You're an angel for managing all this. Seriously, you've saved me. You have no idea, I said softly. What was that? Nothing, I said quickly. Everything's under control. Good, she said. You're the best. After we hung up, I stared at the screen. The best. The words sat heavy, sweet, ironic. I poured another cup of coffee, the bitter scent filling the kitchen. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping the window like a slow metronome. The truth was, I hadn't planned this. Not consciously. But now that it had happened, I couldn't deny the strange satisfaction humming through me. Maybe fate just needed a small push. 2 days later, Tessa dropped by with bagels and a look that could read minds. You're too calm, she said, tossing her purse on the counter. I'm fine. No, you're scary fine. That face you get before something burns down. I smiled. Nothing's burning. She tore a bagel in half. Then why do you look like someone who solved a math problem nobody else knows exists? I hesitated. Let's just say things are balancing themselves. Her brow furrowed. Balancing how I didn't answer. I just sipped my coffee and looked out the window. The rain had stopped, and sunlight caught in the puddles, glinting like tiny mirrors. Hannah, she said slowly, what did you do? Nothing, I said. Yet? She exhaled, setting down her cup. That word scares me coming from you. I laughed softly. It's nothing illegal, just moral gray. Exactly. She leaned forward. Then at least promise me you'll be careful. I am being careful, I said. That's the point. That night I opened Olivia's shared folder again. There it was, the neat timeline, the guest list, the floral arrangements. I noticed her note at the top. If I forget to confirm, Hannah will handle it. She always does. She'd written that line weeks ago, probably without thought. But reading it now, it felt like a prophecy. I scrolled down to the vendor section, the rows of green check marks gleaming like proof. All finalized. All moved to the wrong week. For a moment, guilt brushed against me, soft, human, fleeting. But then I remembered her words. Don't steal my spotlight. No, I thought. I'm just adjusting the lighting. The next morning, I got another call from Mom. Your sister's getting nervous, she said. All brides do near the end. She says you've been quiet. I've been working. Don't let her stress you out, honey. You're the calm one. I smiled into the receiver. You've mentioned that before. Well, it's true. Mom, I asked, when was the last time anyone asked if I was happy being calm? She hesitated. What kind of question is that, a real one? I think you're overthinking again, she said, her tone turning brisk. You always do this, take something simple and make it heavy. Maybe it was heavy all along, I said. She sighed. Try not to ruin your sister's big moment, okay? I wouldn't dream of it, I said. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in silence. The refrigerator hummed softly, steady and dull. I thought about all the times I'd been told to stay calm, to be reasonable, to keep the peace. Maybe peace had never been what they wanted. Maybe they just wanted quiet. That night I dreamed again, this time not of the ballroom but of the calendar. The numbers shifting on their own, sliding from 14 to 21, over and over like a clock rewinding itself. When I woke, I could still hear Olivia's voice echoing in my head, light and cruel. Don't wear anything too bright. The focus should stay on me. In the dim morning light, I whispered back, it will. I opened my laptop. The calendar gleamed neat and harmless. My cursor hovered over the date again. I didn't need to move it. The damage was already done. For the first time, I felt something close to peace, not the quiet kind they'd forced on me, but a deeper, colder one. The kind that comes when balance finally clicks into place. Outside, the sky was clear, the city waking up. Somewhere across town, my sister was smiling into her coffee, certain her perfect wedding was set in stone. And I, the calm one, the steady one, the good sister, sat in my kitchen and let gravity do the rest. That night, the city was quieter than usual. Rain tapped against the windows like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. The bridesmaid dress hung on the back of a chair, champagne satin, untouched since the fitting. I sat on the floor beside it, the glow from my laptop spilling across the hardwood, turning everything silver. The file was still open on the screen, that same wedding spreadsheet with my name stamped across the top. Editor, Hannah Bennett. I should have been panicking, maybe even confessing to Olivia that something had gone wrong. But instead, I felt calm, dangerously calm. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, it sharpens. I picked up my phone and called Tessa. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me you didn't bury a body," she said. "Not yet." She laughed softly. "Then what's that tone? You sound like someone who just found the last page of a mystery novel." I leaned back against the couch, closing my eyes. "Do you ever feel like you've been rehearsing for one moment your entire life?" "Depends on the ending," she said. "This one's not over yet." I told her about the florist, the vendors, the date switch. No one seemed to notice. She didn't interrupt, just listened quietly. When I finished, she exhaled. "Okay, that's impressively subtle," she said. "Accidental, maybe once," I said. "Not anymore. Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just letting things stay how they are." "Same thing, babe," she replied. Her voice softened. "You know what I think." "What, you're tired of being good?" The line went silent for a long beat. Then I said, "Maybe good was just another word for small." When I hung up, I didn't move for a while. The rain kept falling. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, fading into the hum of the city. I turned my head toward the dress. Its shimmer looked almost mocking now, like a costume for a part I never wanted to play. The next morning, Olivia called while I was brushing my teeth. "Hey, can you check the vendor confirmations? I think some people are confused about dates again." I spit into the sink, wiped my mouth, and said, "I'll look into it." "You're a lifesaver," she said, her tone breezy, as if I wasn't the reason her wedding was already off balance. "Oh, and don't forget to RSVP to the rehearsal dinner. Mom's making a big deal out of seating." "Of course she is," I said. Olivia laughed, missing the exhaustion in my voice. "What would I do without you? I think you're about to find out," I whispered after she hung up. That evening I drove to Tessa's apartment. She was arranging flowers on her kitchen counter, a mess of lilies and roses spilling from a mason jar. The smell was thick and sweet. "You look like someone plotting either a novel or a crime," she said when I walked in. "Maybe both," I said. We sat on her couch with takeout boxes balanced on our knees. "She called me again," I said. Tessa chewed slowly. "And she still doesn't suspect a thing." "Of course she doesn't," Tessa said. "People like your sister never think consequences exist for them." "She's just used to winning," I said. "Then let her win," she said with a shrug, "until the prize falls apart in her hands." I smiled faintly. "That's the plan." Later that night, back in my apartment, I opened the wedding folder again. The cursor blinked, waiting. I clicked through each vendor file, florist, catering venue, all under my name. Every one perfectly aligned to the wrong date. I felt my pulse steady, slow, deliberate. For years I'd been told to calm down, to stay reasonable, to rise above. I'd done all of it, and it had gotten me exactly here, being mocked, minimized, used. I whispered to the empty room, "I'm done," rising above. The following afternoon, my phone buzzed nonstop. Olivia, again. I ignored the first two calls, then finally answered. "Hannah. The hotel manager says they're confused about the booking." "Did you talk to them?" "I did," I said evenly. "And it's fine now. Must have been a mix-up." "Oh my God, you're amazing," she said, relief spilling through the line. I knew you'd handle it. I always do. She laughed, distracted. Okay, love you. Don't stress. When she hung up, I stared at the screen. The call log said 31 minutes. It felt like years. That night I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. The city lights blurred through the drizzle, soft gold bleeding into blue. I opened my notebook and began writing, not plans, not excuses, just thoughts. People call it forgiveness when you stop fighting back. But maybe forgiveness is just exhaustion dressed as virtue. I underlined it twice. Then, without thinking, I wrote her name, Olivia. The ink bled slightly on the page. Below it, I added a single sentence. She built her world on my silence. Time to see how strong it really is. My phone buzzed again, Mom, this time. I didn't answer. Instead, I let her voicemail play on speaker. Sweetheart, your sister's nervous. She says some vendors are calling about dates, but I told her you'd fix it. You always do. Don't make her worry, okay? I smiled bitterly. You always do. The family's favorite script. I closed my notebook and leaned back in the chair. The clock ticked softly, each second stretching longer than the last. For a moment, I almost felt guilty. Then, I remembered every time she'd called me dramatic. Every time she'd taken and smiled as if I should be grateful for it. Every time Mom had said, be the bigger person. I wasn't interested in being bigger anymore. I wanted to be even. When midnight came, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark listening to the rain again. It wasn't loud, but it was relentless, soft, steady, inevitable. It hit me then that revenge didn't need to be loud either. It didn't need shouting or confrontation or blood. It could whisper. It could be patient. It could sound like the slow rhythm of rain against glass. I walked over to the laptop, flipped it open, and stared at the spreadsheet one more time. Under event date, the words still read June 21. I didn't change them. I didn't need to. I simply closed the file, poured the last of my wine, and whispered to the night. Let her have her big day. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was balanced, cold, clean, and mine. The morning light came in soft and golden, brushing against the half-open blinds. I woke up before the alarm, the kind of early that feels both heavy and clear. The city was still asleep, except for the quiet hum of traffic below my window. I made coffee black and strong, then opened my laptop. There it was again, the spreadsheet. The pastel pink tabs, the endless lists, the small notes Olivia had left for me like breadcrumbs. Remember to follow up with the florist. Don't forget to double-check seating. You're a lifesaver. Her trust had always been her arrogance disguised as affection. She believed people stayed loyal just because she expected them to. I clicked into the calendar view. The date sat there, still wrong, June 21. My hand hovered over the keyboard, fingers steady. I could fix it in one click. But instead, I scrolled through everything: the catering schedule, the venue booking, the hair and makeup slots. All of it had quietly rearranged itself around that new date, obedient and complete. It was perfect in its own way. Perfectly doomed. My phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. Don't forget to confirm the transportation for June 14. I typed back, already on it. Then I muted the chat. The rest of the day moved like a whisper. I worked, I cleaned, I pretended to function. But every so often I'd catch myself glancing at the calendar on the fridge. 2 weeks until the 14th. 3 until the 21st. The space between them felt electric, like a countdown no one else could hear. That evening I drove to Mom's house for dinner. The table was already set: roast chicken, candles, wine. Olivia and Chase were there, glowing as usual. She was showing Mom her custom invitations. See foil lettering, blush paper, minimal but luxe. Hannah helped choose the font. Mom smiled at me. You always had an eye for detail. I nodded. Guess I do. Olivia reached across the table to touch my hand. I couldn't have done this without you. Her nails were perfect, pale pink, manicured like a signature. Don't worry, she added, laughing. I'll give you credit in my vows. I smiled. Maybe you should. Mom poured more wine, already teary with pride. My girls. always working together. The knife in my hand caught the candlelight, and for one strange second I thought about how sharp it looked. After dinner, as everyone talked about honeymoon destinations, I excused myself to the kitchen. The air smelled like garlic and lemon, and the hum of their voices bled through the walls. I washed the dishes slowly, one plate at a time, the sound of water filling the silence. Mom came in after a few minutes. "You're so quiet tonight." "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." "I'm just thinking." "About what?" "About how much people can take before they stop trying." She frowned. "You've been moody lately, Hannah. Don't ruin your sister's big day with all this tension." I dried my hands on a towel. "I wouldn't dream of it." Mom sighed, her voice softening. "You've always been the calm one. Promise me you'll stay that way." "I promise," I said. And I meant it. Calm had become my greatest disguise. When I got home, I sat on the couch and turned on no lights. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant, the kind that doesn't threaten, just warns. I opened my notebook and drew 2 circles, June 14 and June 21, and connected them with a line. "Balance?" I whispered. The next morning, Olivia called again. "Hannah, I just talked to the florist. She said something about the date changing." "You didn't touch anything, did you?" I forced a small laugh. "No, I didn't. Probably a system error." "Well, fix it," she said, her voice clipped. "You're the tech one." "I'll handle it," I said. "Good. You always do." After the call, I set the phone down and stared out the window. The rain had started again, soft but relentless, streaking down the glass in crooked lines. For years she'd spoken to me that way, orders dressed as gratitude, control disguised as chaos. I'd accepted it because peace was easier than confrontation. But peace built on humiliation isn't peace, it's captivity. That afternoon, Tessa stopped by. She took one look at me and frowned. "You're doing it," she said. "Doing what that thing you do." The quiet plotting. "You've got that look." I smirked. "I don't know what you're talking about." She dropped onto the couch. "You always know exactly what you're doing. That's what scares me." "I'm not scared," I said. "I didn't say you were," she said. "But the scariest people are the ones who stop being scared." We sat in silence for a while. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof. Finally, Tessa asked, "Do you want her to suffer?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I just want her to understand what silence costs." "Careful," she said softly. "Sometimes when people finally understand, they break. Then maybe she'll stop pretending she never broke me first." Tessa didn't argue. She just looked at me with something between worry and admiration. "Whatever you're doing, make sure it's worth it." "It already is," I said. When she left, I returned to my laptop. I opened the calendar again, the one that now held the fate of Olivia's perfect day. I scrolled through the vendor notes one last time. Every confirmation email had been sent. Every box checked. Everything ready. My cursor hovered over the date again, the number 21 glowing faintly. I whispered, "Stay." Then I shut the laptop. Later I tried on the bridesmaid dress. The satin caught the light like liquid gold. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the fabric over my hips, studying the reflection. The woman staring back wasn't the quiet sister or the background character or the family peacekeeper. She was something else, still calm but sharpened. I touched the mirror, the glass cold beneath my fingers. "This isn't revenge," I said softly. "It's gravity." When I turned away, the reflection lingered, faint and ghost-like, as if even the mirror was reluctant to let go. I slipped the dress back into its bag, zipped it up and tucked it in the back of the closet. Out of sight, but waiting. By midnight the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, electric, alive. I sat by the window again, watching the streetlights flicker in the puddles below. The city moved quietly, unaware that a single line on a screen had just rewritten everything. Somewhere across town, Olivia was probably dreaming about her big day, her perfect flowers, her flawless gown, her captive audience. And me, I was done dreaming. I finally had something better. I had control. 3 days before the wedding, my phone buzzed nonstop. Every notification was from Olivia. Texts, emails, voice messages, each one layered with that familiar blend of panic and entitlement. Hannah, call me back now. Did you speak to the hotel? They're saying something about new deposit terms. Mom's freaking out. Fix it, please. I didn't. I muted her number and watched the little red bubbles stack up, unread, unimportant. My coffee went cold beside me as I stared out the window at the morning sky, pale and heavy, like it was holding its breath. By noon, Mom called. Sweetheart, what's happening with the venue? Olivia's in tears. I took a slow sip before answering. Everything's fine. She says they can't confirm the caterer. They can, I said evenly. They just think the event's later than she does. There was a pause, that sharp intake of maternal suspicion. Later. What does that mean? Probably a clerical mix-up, I said. Fix it, she snapped, her patience cracking. I don't want any surprises on your sister's big day. I smiled faintly. Neither do I. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rhythm of rain against the glass. My apartment felt smaller than usual, but not in a bad way, more like the air was tightening, pulling everything into focus. It wasn't guilt keeping me awake. It was anticipation. The next morning, Olivia showed up at my door unannounced. She didn't knock politely, she hammered. When I opened it, she barged in, still in her workout clothes, her hair tied up in that effortless way that had always driven me crazy. You need to explain something to me right now, she said, her voice sharp. Good morning to you too, I said. Don't play dumb, Hannah. The Harrington called this morning. They said the final walkthrough is next week. Next week. Why would they say that? I leaned against the counter, pretending to think. Strange. Strange, she snapped. It's not strange, it's wrong. The wedding is Saturday. Saturday. Are you sure? I asked softly. Her mouth fell open. Am I? What kind of question is that? Calm down, I said. We'll figure it out. She threw her hands up. You were supposed to handle the logistics. This is your fault. My fault, I repeated, my voice low but steady. I followed the documents you gave me. Every vendor, every date. Her eyes flashed. Don't you dare shift this on me. I'm not, I said. But maybe you should have double-checked, instead of assuming I'd just clean up your mess again. The air between us went still. She blinked, caught off guard by my tone. Wow, she said slowly. Is that what this is? You're jealous because I have something you don't. I laughed quietly. What exactly is that? Live a wedding approval. A spotlight. She crossed her arms. You've always hated when I get attention. Admit it. I've never hated it, I said. I just stopped thinking you deserved it. Her lips parted in shock. For once, she didn't have a comeback. I stepped closer. You've spent your whole life taking what wasn't yours and calling it love. Maybe this time love's taking something back. She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. The sound echoed through the apartment long after she was gone. That evening, Tessa came over. She didn't knock either. She never did. So she said, setting down 2 coffees, You had the showdown. Yep. How'd it go? She thinks I ruined her wedding. Technically you haven't yet, Tessa said. You've just shifted it. She'll figure it out soon enough. Tessa studied me for a long time. How do you feel? Lighter, I said. Almost free. She nodded slowly. You know I keep waiting for you to say it. Say what? That you're scared. I smiled. I'm not. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. Tessa leaned back, her expression soft. You've always been the quiet storm, Han. People never see you coming until everything's underwater. I looked at her. Then maybe it's time they learned how to swim. She grinned. Remind me never to cross you. The next day, Olivia sent another wave of texts, long, frantic, emotional. The tone had shifted. Less anger, more desperation. They're saying the hotel is fully booked on our date. Did you change something? Please just tell me. Mom's crying. She thinks I'm losing my mind. I typed one reply, short and simple. Everything's under control. Then I turned off my phone. That night I took out the bridesmaid dress again. The fabric shimmered in the dim light, soft and heavy in my hands. I slipped it on and stood in front of the mirror the same as before, but something felt different. I didn't look like someone who had been stepped on. I looked like someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for standing tall. The reflection didn't feel foreign anymore, it felt earned. I thought of all the times Olivia had told me not to upstage her, to dress simpler, speak softer, take smaller steps. "Let me shine," she used to say. I used to believe her light was something worth protecting. Now I knew it only shined when she stood on someone else's shadow. And this time there would be no shadow left. 2 days before the wedding that wasn't Mom called again. Her voice was tight, brittle. "Hannah, I don't know what's happening, but Olivia's falling apart. She says the venue's unresponsive and no one's returning calls." "That's strange," I said. "Don't you dare," she snapped. "Don't you dare play innocent." "I'm not," I said calmly. "You always do this overreact, twist things, make everything about you." I let out a small laugh. "That's funny. I was just thinking how this time it's not about me at all. What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe the universe finally caught up." She was silent for a moment. Then she said coldly, "You're being cruel." "Cruel," I said softly. "No, I'm just not cleaning up someone else's cruelty anymore." Before she could respond, I ended the call. The quiet after was almost holy. That night I walked down to the lake. The sky was heavy with clouds, the water dark and still. My reflection shimmered faintly in the surface, blurred, fractured, but there. I picked up a small stone and tossed it. The ripples spread out in widening circles, slow and deliberate. That was all this had ever been, a ripple. A shift. The smallest change that made everything around it move. Back home, I sat by the window until dawn, watching the light return to the city. The streets began to fill with people unaware that somewhere across town an entire wedding was about to collapse quietly, perfectly, without anyone seeing it coming. And me, I just sat there, hands steady around my coffee mug, finally understanding what balance really felt like. It wasn't peace. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the exact moment before a storm breaks, still calm and inevitable. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and quiet, almost too calm for what was coming. I woke to sunlight cutting through the blinds, sharp and gold painting lines across my sheets. For a moment, I forgot what day it was. Then my phone buzzed and the reminder flashed across the screen: Olivia's wedding. Harrington Grand, 10 a.m. I stared at it for a long time. The text looked innocent enough, harmless even, but the weight of it pressed against my chest. The machine had no idea it was counting down to nothing. The city outside was already alive. Cars, birds, the distant whine of sirens, but inside my apartment everything felt frozen. I made coffee slow and deliberate, the smell rich and grounding. I didn't check my messages. I didn't need to. I already knew what they'd say. By 8 o'clock, my phone started to ring. First Olivia, then Mom, then again and again. I let it vibrate across the table until it fell silent. I wasn't going. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, while sunlight spread across the floor like a spotlight I hadn't asked for. There was something strangely peaceful about knowing chaos was unraveling somewhere without me. When the phone buzzed again, I finally picked it up. It was Tessa. She didn't bother with good morning. "It's happening," she said. I smiled faintly. "Already? Oh, it's bad. Real bad. I think the Harrington staff just realized no event exists under her name for today. The ballroom's empty." I leaned back in my chair. Empty completely. No flowers, no catering, nothing. People are showing up and there's no one to greet them. "Hannah, it's like a ghost party." I could hear the mix of horror and awe in her voice. And Olivia freaking out. She's in full meltdown mode. Mom's trying to calm her down, but you know how that goes. I pictured it perfectly, the chaos, the panic, the slow dawning realization that this time no one was coming to save her. I whispered, "The wrong week." "What, nothing," I said. "Keep me posted." When I hung up, I didn't move for a while. I just listened to the quiet hum of the city around me, the distant clatter of a life continuing, as if nothing monumental had shifted. It wasn't joy I felt, not victory either. It was stillness, the kind that comes when the world finally matches the calm you've been faking for years. By 9, my phone was a storm. Dozens of messages, Mom, Olivia, bridesmaids, even the florist. Where are you, Hannah? Call me now. This isn't funny. Everything's gone wrong. They say the reservation is for next week. Fix this. I turned the phone face down on the table. For years, they'd made me their problem solver, their scapegoat, their emotional janitor. I cleaned, I soothed, I saved. But not today. Today I let silence do the talking. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of church bells from a few blocks away. Somewhere else, another couple was saying "I do," while my sister stood in an empty ballroom screaming at strangers. It was poetic in its own twisted way. At 10, Tessa called again. I answered this time. It's unreal, she said, half breathless. Guests are standing around in the lobby, totally confused. Some are leaving. The coordinator tried calling the hotel manager, but the contract's under your name. They can't reach you. Good, I said quietly. Hannah, she said, after a beat you sound. Calm. I am calm. That's terrifying. I laughed softly. It's just balance. You can't take from someone forever without giving something back. And you think this is giving back? I stared out the window. No. This is gravity. Tessa was silent for a moment. Then she said, They're calling it a disaster. Your mom's blaming the hotel. Olivia's blaming you. Of course she is, I said. She's saying you sabotaged her. I smiled. Technically, I just didn't save her. Hannah, it's fine, Tess. Let them talk. That's all they've ever been good at. When we hung up, I poured another cup of coffee, the warmth seeping into my palms. I walked to the window, looking down at the street below. People passed by laughing, holding hands, living lives untouched by betrayal or payback. The world didn't stop for my revenge. It just kept moving, as if to remind me that the quietest justice is the kind that doesn't need applause. By 11, I finally checked my voicemail. Mom's voice was trembling, furious. You've gone too far, Hannah. She's humiliated. People are leaving crying. Do you understand what you've done? Then Olivia's sharp and broken. You think this is funny? You ruined me. You. The message cut off, replaced by static. Then Dad's voice, quieter. Your mother's in shock. I don't know what happened, but please tell me this wasn't you. I deleted all 3. The clock ticked slow and steady. Noon came and went. My phone kept buzzing, but I let it fade into background noise. Around 1, I got another call from Tessa. Her tone was softer now, almost reverent. It's over, she said. They cleared out the guests. The staff said the ballroom's reserved for next weekend. It's done. I exhaled. She'll blame me forever. Probably, Tessa said. But that's not the same as being right. I smiled faintly. No, it's not. What are you going to do now? Nothing, I said. Absolutely nothing. She laughed quietly. You're colder than I thought. Not cold, I said. Just done. After the call, I finally left the apartment. The city air hit me like a baptism, fresh, brisk, alive. I walked without direction, just letting my feet find rhythm against the sidewalk. I ended up at the lake. The water glittered under the noon sun, calm and endless. I sat on a bench, the same one I used to visit when things felt too heavy. Today, it felt lighter. My reflection shimmered on the surface, steady, unflinching. For 34 years, I'd been the background character in someone else's story. Today, for the first time, I wasn't in the picture at all. I closed my eyes and breathed in. The air smelled of rain and freedom. Somewhere across town, Olivia was probably standing in her perfect dress, her voice cracking as she screamed at the sky, wondering how everything she controlled had slipped away. But it wasn't chaos. It was consequence. And for once, I didn't feel guilty for letting it happen. By the time I got home, the sun had begun to sink. My phone sat silent on the table, the screen black and blank. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the city turn gold. The quiet settled around me like a familiar friend. I'd expected revenge to feel hot, to burn to rage. But this was different. It was cool, steady, complete. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And that whisper was enough to fill the silence they'd left me in for years. The next morning, sunlight poured through my window like nothing had happened. Birds chirped somewhere outside, a delivery truck rumbled down the street, and my phone sat face down on the table, silent after yesterday's storm. For a few blissful seconds, I let myself believe the world had simply moved on. Then the knock came. It wasn't gentle, sharp, insistent. The kind of knock that carried decades of authority. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. When I opened the door, Mom stood there, hair, perfectly styled, pearls around her neck, rage polished into elegance. Behind her, Dad lingered a few steps back, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" she asked, though she was already stepping past me. "Of course," I said, quietly closing the door. She didn't sit. She stood in the middle of my living room, arms crossed, eyes scanning the space like she was searching for evidence of guilt. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I took a slow breath. "Yes. Do you?" she snapped. "Because your sister was humiliated in front of 200 guests yesterday. Do you understand what that means for this family?" I tilted my head. "For the family or for you?" Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Don't twist this. You've embarrassed all of us." Dad spoke softly. "Hannah, your mother's right. This has gone too far." I turned to him. "Did it go too far when she took my venue? When you both told me to stay quiet? Or is it only too far now that she's crying?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "We're not talking about that anymore." "Of course not," I said. "We never talk about the things that actually hurt." Mom stepped closer. This vindictive behavior, it isn't you. You're better than this, am I?" I said. "You've spent years telling me I wasn't enough, that I needed to be calmer, quieter, smaller. And now that I'm not, suddenly, it's wrong." She shook her head, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "You've destroyed your sister's wedding." "No," I said evenly. "She destroyed her own wedding the moment she decided I was just a tool she could use." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You think this makes you strong, it makes you cruel." I smiled faintly. "You always confuse strength with cruelty. Probably because you've never had to tell the difference." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Mom said, "Your sister is devastated. She may never forgive you." "I can live with that," I said. Dad looked at me with something like sadness. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do," I said. "Because forgiveness from people who never saw you isn't healing. It's just another kind of blindness." Mom exhaled sharply and turned toward the door. "I don't know who you've become, Hannah, but she's not welcome in this family." I smiled softly. "Then it's a good thing I stopped asking for an invitation." She froze for half a second, then left without another word. The sound of her heels faded down the hallway until there was only silence again. Dad lingered. He looked tired, older somehow. "You know she'll never admit you were right, I know." He hesitated. "I didn't come here to take sides, but what you did, it was brutal." I looked him in the eye. "You've spent your whole life keeping the peace, Dad. Tell me, how does it feel to realize peace was just another word for pretending?" He didn't answer. He just nodded once quietly and walked out. When the door closed, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. The apartment felt both emptier and fuller all at once. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. Outside, the world kept moving. People walking, dogs, couples holding hands, cars honking. None of them had any idea that somewhere a family had just cracked apart. For years I'd imagined what justice would look like. I thought it would be loud, a dramatic confrontation, a cinematic ending. But standing there in the stillness, I realized it was the opposite. Justice wasn't thunder, it was quiet. I could hear every beat of my heart in it. By afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Tessa, so she asked, "Did they show up?" "They did. And it's done," I said. "Completely." "Good," she said softly. "You sound different." "I am," I said. "It's strange. I thought I'd feel lighter, but it's more like neutral, balanced. That's peace, babe. It's supposed to feel weird at first, maybe," I said. Tessa hesitated. "You know they're going to talk, right? Your mom, your sister. They'll make you the villain." "I've been the villain before," I said. "At least this time I earned it." She laughed quietly. "Remind me again why I love you, because you appreciate efficiency." We hung up and I sat at my desk staring at my laptop. The spreadsheet was still open from before all those careful columns and boxes. I scrolled through it one last time. Every confirmation, every adjustment, every small change that had led here. Then I selected the file and pressed delete. It asked, "Are you sure you want to move this item to the trash?" "Yes," I whispered. When it disappeared, I felt something loosen inside me, like an old knot finally undone. That evening, I took a walk to the lake. The air smelled of rain and lilacs, a strange mix of endings and beginnings. The water was calm, reflecting the city lights like a mirror that finally stopped lying. I sat on the same bench as before. My reflection looked steadier now, almost defiant. Behind me, a couple laughed, holding hands, their happiness unshaken by the quiet revenge of a stranger. And I realized something small but true: I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Olivia, not even at Mom. They'd built a house out of favoritism and silence, and I'd just stopped paying rent. The thought made me smile. When I got home, I found another voicemail waiting. It was Olivia. Her voice was raw, cracked from crying. "You won," she said. "Is that what you wanted? To see me humiliated? To make everyone hate me?" I listened quietly. "You destroyed everything. Are you proud of yourself?" she continued. "You could have just talked to me." I almost laughed. Talked. As if talking had ever changed anything. "I hope you're happy," she said finally, her voice breaking on the last word. When the message ended, I didn't delete it. I saved it. Not out of spite, but as proof. Proof that for once I hadn't been erased. Later, as the sky turned dark, I lit a single candle on the counter. Its glow flickered gently across the room. I thought about all the times I'd been told to stay small, to swallow my pain quietly. Now, the silence belonged to me. I whispered to the candle flame, "Let her remember this the next time she tries to steal something that isn't hers." The flame danced bright and steady. For the first time in my life, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like power. 2 days passed before the world started whispering. It began: online blurred photos, a few snarky comments, then full-blown gossip threads. Bride left at empty venue. Sister sabotage, family feud gone wrong. I didn't go looking for them, but they found me anyway. Someone tagged me on a Facebook post, another sent a DM with a link. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but it didn't have to be. People love a villain, especially one who looks like she finally stopped pretending to be the good girl. By the third day, the story hit a local lifestyle blog. I stared at the headline, "The More Wedding Disaster. When Family Secrets Ruin the Big Day." A photo of Olivia in her gown accompanied it, mascara-streaked eyes wide in shock. It would have been tragic if I didn't know her so well. The article quoted a source close to the family who said I'd been jealous, unstable, dramatic. Probably Mom. I could hear her voice in every line, polite, victimized, perfect. I closed the laptop. The world could write whatever story it wanted. I already knew mine. That afternoon, Tessa stopped by with a paper bag and her usual mix of concern and sarcasm. "You're trending," she said, dropping the bag on the counter. "Brought sandwiches. Thought you might need fuel for surviving public opinion." I smiled faintly. "How bad is it bad for her?" Tessa said, unwrapping her food. "Half the comments think she got what she deserved. The other half think you're the devil. So, balanced, I can live with that," I said. Tessa took a bite, studying me. "You really can, can't you?" That's the scary part. It's not scary, I said. It's quiet. She leaned back. So what now? You just move on, I thought about it. The idea of moving on sounded foreign, like a language I hadn't spoken in years. Maybe I said. Or maybe I just stopped waiting for them to catch up. When she left, I stood by the window for a long time watching the city hum below. Somewhere out there my family was scrambling to rewrite the narrative. They'd always been good at that. But this time the story didn't belong to them. Later that evening my phone buzzed again, Dad. I answered, though part of me already regretted it. Hannah, he began carefully. Your mother's been crying all day. She cries when she loses control, I said. Grace, he stopped himself, catching the slip. Olivia is struggling. She's not eating, not leaving the house. I let out a slow breath. I'm sorry she's hurting, but that pain isn't mine to fix. She's your sister. I know, I said quietly. But that doesn't make me her repairman. There was silence on the line. Then he said softly, I don't think you realize how far this went. Oh, I realize, I said. For once I just didn't stop it. He sighed, the kind of tired sound that comes from years of watching someone else set the rules. You've made your point. I wasn't making a point, Dad, I said. I was making space. He didn't answer. When the line went dead, I set the phone down gently. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk staring at the empty space where my wedding binder used to be. I'd thrown it out weeks ago, but the absence still felt loud. In its place, I kept my camera. It had gathered dust during the chaos. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and felt something stir. The weight was familiar grounding. Through its lens, I'd once learned how to see beauty and imperfection. Maybe I needed to see that again. The next morning, I went out early. The air was crisp, the city waking slowly. I walked along the lake with the camera slung around my neck. Light spilled over the water, soft and forgiving. I lifted the lens, took a photo, then another. Ripples, reflections, strangers laughing, ordinary things, all of them real. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking through anger. I was just looking. Around noon, Tessa texted. You okay? Yeah, I replied. Just breathing again. That afternoon I got an email. The subject line made me pause. From Gallery West. Inquiry about your work. It took a second before I remembered. Months ago, before everything fell apart, I'd submitted a few photos for a small local showcase. I opened the message. Dear Miss Bennett, we were deeply moved by your submission. Your work feels raw, intimate, like light finding its way through damage. We'd love to discuss a feature in our upcoming exhibit. I read it 3 times before I realized my hands were shaking. Maybe the world had just handed me something that was actually mine. That evening, I walked into my apartment and set the camera down gently. The silence felt different now, less like absence, more like potential. I made tea, sat at the window, and watched the last streaks of sunlight slip behind the skyline. Somewhere out there, Olivia was probably still angry. Mom still rewriting history. But for once their noise didn't reach me. It wasn't that I'd stopped caring. I'd just stopped giving them the only thing they ever wanted, my attention. The next morning I woke up early again. The air smelled of rain and coffee, the kind of morning that feels like a clean slate. I opened my inbox. Another email from the gallery. We'd love to meet this Friday to review your work in person. I smiled. Friday, I whispered. That's a good day for new beginnings. Then my phone buzzed, another call from Mom. I almost ignored it, but something inside me said, end this properly. I answered. Hannah, she said, her tone brittle. I don't know what to say to you. Then don't, I said gently. You've humiliated your family, your sister, yourself. I told the truth without saying a word, I said. Truth, she spat. You call ruining someone's life truth? No, I said softly. I call it consequence. There was silence. I could almost hear her trying to shape her anger into control. Your father thinks you need help, she said finally. I did, I said, and I helped myself. She made a small broken sound like disbelief wrapped in fear. You sound like a stranger. I think that's the point, I said and ended the call. I sat there for a while, staring at the quiet phone in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't even tremble. It was strange how peace could feel so solid, almost heavy. That night I took out my camera again and photographed my reflection in the window. No makeup, no forced smile, just me, the woman who'd stopped waiting for permission to exist. The shutter clicked crisp and clean. For the first time, I liked what I saw. Outside, the city lights flickered in patterns that looked like forgiveness. Not from them, but from myself. Maybe revenge wasn't the end after all. Maybe it was just the part where the silence finally turned into something beautiful. Friday came sooner than I expected. The city felt different that morning, lighter somehow, as if it had been holding its breath, and finally decided to exhale. I got dressed, slowly choosing a simple black dress and tying my hair back. No makeup, no mask, no armor. Just me. When I arrived at Gallery West, sunlight was pouring through the tall windows, scattering across the polished floor. The air smelled faintly of paint and possibility. A woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair greeted me with a smile. "Hannah Bennett." "That's me," I said, shaking her hand. "I'm Maria," she said warmly. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your submission really stood out." "Thank you," I said, still a little unsure what to do with the compliment. She led me through the open space where half-finished exhibits stood waiting for their turn. "Your photos, they're raw," she said. "They don't pretend to heal. They just exist. That's rare." I smiled faintly. I guess that's all I wanted to stop pretending. Maria stopped in front of an empty wall. "I'd like this to be yours. A small exhibit for now. Something honest. Something called—" She tilted her head. "Do you have a title?" I thought for a moment. Then it came to me. Uninvited. Her eyes lit up. Perfect. When I left the gallery, the sunlight hit my face warm and clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching people rush past strangers, all of them. But for the first time, that didn't feel lonely. It felt freeing. That afternoon, I went home and started digging through my archives. Old hard drives, forgotten folders, even photos I'd dismissed years ago. I looked at them differently now. Each one was a fragment of who I'd been patient, overlooked, waiting for permission. But as I sorted through them, I realized something strange. The best photos, the ones that caught breath instead of posing for it, had all been taken during moments of silence, between fights, after tears, in the stillness, right before I'd been told to move on. Maybe that was my language all along. Not noise, not apology, just quiet truth. Around 6, my phone buzzed. It was Tessa, so she asked, "How was it?" "I got it," I said simply. Her scream nearly deafened me. "Are you kidding me?" "I told you," I laughed, "a real one this time. It's just a small exhibit. It's the first step," she said. "And you earned every inch of it." I hesitated, then said, "You've been my anchor through all this, Tess. I hope you know that. Please," she said. "Watching you burn down a toxic family system has been the highlight of my year." "You're terrible," I said, smiling. "I'm honest," she replied. When we hung up, I sat on the floor, surrounded by prints and sketches, the faint hum of the city filling the space around me. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine and checked my inbox. One new message. The sender's name stopped me. Olivia Moore. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I opened it. "Hannah, I heard about your gallery. Congratulations. Really. I guess you finally got what you wanted, your own spotlight. Mom's been quiet lately. Dad keeps saying we should talk, but I don't even know what to say. Every time I think about the wedding, I get angry again. But then I look at the photos online, the ones you took years ago, and I miss you. I miss us before all this. I don't know if I'll ever understand why you did it, but I hope someday I can. Olivia." I reread the message 3 times. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close, but it wasn't hatred either. It was something in between, a flicker of acknowledgement. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Then I typed again. "Olivia, maybe we both needed to stop pretending everything was fine. Maybe this was the only way either of us would ever listen. I don't hate you. I just stopped living for your approval. Take care of yourself. H. I hovered over send for a long time before pressing it. Afterward, I stood by the window watching the city lights pulse against the night sky. Somewhere across town, she'd be reading it, maybe crying, maybe cursing me. Either way, the silence between us finally felt clean. The next morning, I went to the print shop to prepare the first set for the exhibit. The man behind the counter, an older gentleman with kind eyes, looked through the files. "These are powerful," he said. "What's the story behind them?" I smiled. "Reclamation." He nodded thoughtfully. "You can see that. There's pain here, but also freedom." I watched the printer hum to life, each image sliding out crisp and luminous. Faces' reflections light through broken glass. It all told the story. I'd never been brave enough to say aloud. When I got home, I laid the prints across my floor. My apartment turned into a timeline past selves, staring back at me, each one asking, "Are we safe now?" And for the first time, I could answer yes. That night, Dad called. His voice was softer than I remembered. "Your mother saw the article about your exhibit," he said. "I'm sure she loved it," I said dryly. "She didn't say much. But she didn't throw the paper away either." I smiled faintly. "That's progress." He chuckled weakly. "You know, when you were little, you used to sit by the window with that disposable camera and take pictures of raindrops. Your mom thought it was silly. I didn't. You saw things differently even back then." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thanks, Dad." He hesitated. "I'm proud of you, Hannah." The words landed softly but deep. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that," I said quietly. After we hung up, I walked to the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the quiet sister, the peacekeeper, or the backup plan. She was something new, formed, defined, complete. The gallery would open in 2 weeks. I didn't know if my parents or Olivia would come. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. It didn't matter. The story wasn't about them anymore. Before bed, I wrote one last note in my journal. Revenge was never the point. It was the doorway. What waited on the other side was me. I closed the book, turned off the lights, and stood in the glow of the city for a while. The sound of life outside was steady and soft. For years I'd been told silence meant surrender, but tonight, silence sounded like victory. The night before the exhibit opened, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor, surrounded by prints, portraits of strangers, reflections in mirrors, hands reaching for light. The apartment smelled faintly of ink and coffee. My thoughts moved slower than usual, like my mind had finally stopped running, but hadn't figured out what to do with the stillness. At sunrise, the sky over Chicago blushed pink and gold. I stood at the window, watching it bloom over the lake, the same lake where I'd sat weeks ago, whispering to the water that I was done being quiet. Now the quiet didn't scare me. It felt earned. By 9, I was at Gallery West. Maria was already there, moving briskly through the room, clipboard in hand. The walls gleamed white, the photos arranged like chapters. "Uninvited" hung at the entrance in black lettering, simple and bold. "You ready?" she asked, smiling. "As I'll ever be," I said. "Good," she said. "People love stories that tell the truth, even when it hurts." When the doors opened that evening, the room filled quickly. The sound of footsteps and soft murmurs replaced the usual hum of my own doubts. People moved slowly from photo to photo, pausing, tilting their heads, whispering to each other. I stood near the back, unseen but watching everything. A woman in her 60s stopped in front of my self-portrait, the one I'd taken after Olivia's wedding. She studied it for a long time, then turned to me. "You took this?" "Yes," I said. She nodded. "It's not pretty, but it's honest. That's rarer." Her words hit something deep inside me. "Thank you," I said quietly. As the night went on, more people approached. Some asked questions, some just smiled. Some looked at me like they recognized themselves in my silence. Each one felt like a small piece of healing I hadn't known I needed. Then near the end of the evening, I saw them. Mom stood at the doorway, clutching her purse like it was a shield. Dad was beside her, his hand hovering near her back, unsure whether to guide or protect. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She looked around the gallery, eyes sharp, scanning the walls like she was trying to prepare herself for whatever she might find. When her gaze landed on me, the room seemed to tilt. She walked slowly, carefully, like every step was a negotiation. When she reached me, she stopped just short of touching distance. "It's different," she said. "Different good or different bad?" She hesitated. "Different true." I blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't expect you to come." "Your father insisted," she said softly. Then after a pause, "But I wanted to see what you've made." I gestured toward the wall. "These are pieces of what I couldn't say." She looked at the self-portrait again, her expression unreadable. "You look tired in this one." "I was," I said. "But I wasn't broken." She turned back to me. Her eyes for once weren't cold. "I didn't realize how much I taught you to disappear," she said quietly. The words hit harder than any apology could have. "I didn't realize how much I let it happen," I said. We stood there in silence for a while, surrounded by other people's whispers and the soft echo of our own history. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "This isn't an apology," she said. "It's just recognition." I took it but didn't open it. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, her voice fragile. "Your sister wanted to come, but she wasn't ready." "I didn't expect her to be," I said. Before she left, she turned back once. "You were always meant to be seen, Hannah. I just never knew how to let you be." Then she was gone. When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, Maria handed me a glass of champagne. "To survival turned into art," she said. I smiled. To honesty that finally stopped hiding. After everyone left, I stayed behind. The gallery was empty now, but the air was alive with memory. I walked from photo to photo, letting my fingertips hover near the prints. Each one was a confession, but not one I regretted. When I reached the final image, a shot of the lake at sunrise, I stopped. The water was still endless open. For years, I'd mistaken forgiveness for silence. Now I knew better. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was releasing what no longer deserved to hold space. I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The night air was cool, the city glowing softly in the distance. Across the street, Dad waited by the car. He smiled when he saw me. "Proud of you, kiddo." "Thanks, Dad. She liked it," he said quietly. "More than she'll admit." "I could tell," I said. He hesitated. "You should read the letter." "I will," I promised. When I got home, the apartment was dark, except for the faint light from the street. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope still unopened. For a long time I just stared at it, tracing the outline of my mother's handwriting. Then I opened it. "Hannah, I saw the photographs. I saw you. For the first time, I think I finally saw you without the noise of who I wanted you to be. I don't know if I'll ever understand the choices you made, but I know they came from a place deeper than anger, maybe even deeper than pain. You were right, peace built on silence isn't peace at all. I'm sorry for mistaking control for love. Mom." I folded the letter back carefully. There were no tears this time, no shaking, just a quiet, full acceptance. I walked to the balcony, the night air brushing my skin. Below, the city pulsed with light. I took a deep breath, lifted my camera, and pointed it at the skyline. The shutter clicked once, soft, final, certain. The next morning I woke early and went for a walk by the lake. The sun was climbing over the water, the same soft gold as the one in my final photo. I stood there for a long moment, letting the light wash over me. Somewhere, Olivia was probably still angry. Somewhere, Mom was probably rereading her own words. But for once, their stories weren't mine to carry. This was my life now. Unedited, uninvited, unafraid. When I got home, I posted one last message on the gallery's page. "To everyone who has ever been silenced, your story still exists, even if no one claps for it. Speak anyway, shine anyway. You were never the guest. You were always the light." I hit post, set the phone down, and smiled. The city outside was awake, full of noise and color. I stepped into it, camera in hand, ready to start again, not as someone's sister or daughter or scapegoat, just as me. And somewhere deep in that noise, I swear I heard my own voice echo back, steady, sure, and finally free. If you've ever had to fight for your own light, tell me your story. Maybe it's time the world saw it too.